So this question says 25 centimetre cube samples of sodium hydroxide were taken by a pipette from a beaker. These were then titrated with ethanoic acid. Concentration of ethanoic acid was found to be lower than the actual value, which could explain the difference. So this is about required practical 1 and understanding what has an effect on your answer. So if we rinse the pipette with distilled water, what would that do before filling it? So then we didn't re-rinse it with the sodium hydroxide. This would lower the concentration of the sodium hydroxide, which would then in turn lower the moles of sodium hydroxide transferred into the beaker, which would mean that we would we would need, if we've got lower moles, less ethanoic acid than we should do to titrate it. Now, if that was true, then the experimental concentration of ethanoic acid would actually be found to be higher than the real value because we used less than we should have done, and therefore we think it's more concentrated than it is. So this is not correct. These are quite tricky to work through. You have to use your logic step by step. If we rinse the burette with distilled water, then that would lower the concentration of ethanoic acid. And so the experimental value would be lower than the actual value because we've lowered its concentration by adding water to it. But let's just double check again against the others. If we rinse the wall of the conical flask with distilled water during the titration, that has absolutely no effect. We know that's a technique we can use to make sure all of our ethanoic acid transfers into the solution. Once we've transferred the sodium hydroxide moles, adding water to that is not going to change the moles, and so we aren't going to affect the answer. So this is definitely wrong. If we rinse the beaker with distilled water before filling it with sodium hydroxide, it's going to have the same effect as A. We're going to lower the concentration of sodium hydroxide, and as we lower the concentration of sodium hydroxide, we will need less ethanoic acid to neutralise it, and therefore we'll think the concentration of ethanoic acid is higher than it was because we used less than we should have done.